An energetic display on Easter Sunday turned out a final tour of the St. Peter's Square for Pope Francis, who died only hours after at the age of 88. He arrived in Vatican, a papal outsider, having risen through the rough ages of the Argentina capital of Buenos Aires, where he was Archbishop. He is tonight being celebrated as the people's Pope, the Pope with a common man touch and a heart for the poor and the downtrodden. We are on the Vatican watch as the Pope Francis transition unfolds. We shall then swing to the Far East, where President William Ruto is on a tour of China. Earlier today, details emerged of deals ranging from the extension of the SGR to the establishment of a chicken farm. We put each deal on the weighing scale. Some sense is mathematical. And is the Ministry of Education finally getting its math right? Bonyo picks a bone with a culture of public officials that don't care for life or limb. And on my memo, power and humility, lessons from Vihiga to the Vatican. Yvonne Steak and Kaikai Skika take a breather. The gang is here.
Our society experiences divisions, whether ethnic, religious, or economic. All men and women of goodwill are called to work for reconciliation and peace, forgiveness and healing, in the work of building a sound democratic order, strengthening cohesion and integration, tolerance and respect for others, the pursuit of the common good must be a primary goal.
That was Pope Francis speaking in 2015 when he came to Kenya. He was at State House, and he speaks about these things that he is known for, gentlemen, about peace and reconciliation and forgiveness and healing. And it's something that he's known for, the people's Pope, the common man's Pope. I think I would start with you, Gituku, because when anyone talks about Pope Francis and his leadership, the reflection is about compassion and humility and purpose. That's the kind of leader he was. He leaves behind a legacy that I think is in contrast to what we are used to in terms of leadership in Kenya. But before we get into that, talk a bit about what Pope Francis' leadership means.
Right. A very difficult week it has been, especially for those that after seeing Pope Francis on Easter Sunday, they thought that now he was actually making that stronger walk into recovery, especially after seeing him come to greet the congregation and also to bless them. But then again, of course, you saw what happened on Easter Monday, that now the official report talks about that he suffered several things. There was coma, there was cardiovascular issue that he also suffered, and of course losing his life. The time was 7:35 a.m. At the Vatican. And of course, through this week, you've heard of different leaders talking about how they remember the Pope, different citizens and also Christians remembering him for what he was. And I think for Kenya, you must have seen the sort of stories that have been produced, looking at people that had an opportunity to interact with him back in 2015 when he visited. And as you talk about humility, I would liken it to exactly that particular year, because just after mid of 2015, President of the US then, Barack Obama, visited the country. And I remember we were covering that unique visit, the first ever, I think, of a sitting US president coming to the Republic. And we told stories of how he would get here, the beast itself that would carry him. And that time, you remember even the current president saying that hata wazungu wameanza kuja Kenya. Because now at that time, the US president was here. There were reports that the Pope would be visiting. Eventually, the visit became true. And I recall that just days before the Pope arrived, there were now rumors of how he would arrive, the car that he would ride in. And he chose a Honda Civic, which is low cc sort of car. If I recall watching him arriving at the St. Joseph the Worker Catholic Church in Kangemi, because I was there for coverage, and you see the humility that he carried himself with, riding, mingling with the citizens, coming to greet them, speaking with them, having real conversations, personal conversations that you may not see with political leaders. And it just tells you he was a different person. Of course, he's not a head of a government, like you'd say, a political government like the rest of the country. So he has what other heads of government do not have, because heads of government have the question of security and their safety. He's a religious leader. So coming here, and of course, the kind of leadership he has shown the church, the welcoming the poor. And earlier on we were speaking to the Pope's representative to Kenya, talking about those that have been pushed to the periphery. They're the ones that he was trying to bring on board, bring to the table, especially when it comes to the matters of the church. But beyond that, he was very keen on speaking about peace and resolution of conflicts across different parts of the world, including Kenya, including East African region. He was very vocal about South Sudan. He's been vocal about Sudan. He's also been speaking about the Democratic Republic of Congo. So you look at a man that was looking towards how can you protect life, how can you make the poor have a better day. And I think we're going to miss that from him. And of course, I remember earlier in the week someone sending me a message and saying that it looks like we have lost the leader of hope, the leader of morality. Obviously, we'll miss him, but the hope can be that our leaders at least got something while he lived.
Gituku, you know, he was different from the beginning because he came from the Jesuit group, a very small sect of a very small part of the Catholic Church. They're not. I don't know how many other Jesuit popes they had before. Maybe
he was the first one.
He was the first one.
Yep.
He had come from Buenos Aires. He had been the bishop there. His past included even stints as a bouncer at a nightclub, and then he ends up being the Pope, leading about 2 billion people across the world. And you talk about how he pulled those who are in the periphery. You talk about his compassion and his love for the poor and the downtrodden and those who are different. One of the things I think that touched me about this Pope was after the war in Gaza started in October 2023, he said he calls the bishop at the Catholic Church there every single evening on video call just to find out how they're doing. And I saw a video of that, and he even knows them by name, and he was talking to them and even their children. And you could clearly see this is someone they are comfortable with. Be someone who you every evening calls to check on you and how you're doing. I think that is a testament of the kind of person he was. We talk about how he protected those who may have been forgotten in society. There's a soundbite I want us to listen to. This was a victim of abuse who talked about what the Pope had done and how much that meant to this person. Let's listen to that soundbite.
First thing he said to me was, first of all, before we start, I want to say sorry for what happened to you. I mean, in the name of the church, I want to really say sorry. And also sorry for what I said in Chile, because I made it worse for you. So I really apologize. Pope Francis did a lot. There is still a lot to be done. But the things that Pope Francis has done, nobody else has done. And it's the beginning of something I feel cannot be stopped.
He talks about how the Pope apologized for something he said in Chile. And he has apologized quite a bit about institutional failures. And he has faced abuse and crisis head on. He has been criticized for some of the things he had done because he went opposite to what the traditional Catholic Church was. I think that's part of what his appeal was, the fact that he was doing all these things that were unexpected.
In fact, the choice of name, as Francis says it all.
Yeah.
Because as some would explain, once you've been elected a pope, you choose a name. And he chose the name Francis, which simply means humility and things of the sort, looking through to the poor and the likes. And as a journalist, I must say that Pope Francis was quite the newsmaker. That every public appearance he made, there was a bigger and a global scale story that you'd get from him. And this tells you why there's all these talk about people would miss him and people would miss how he would get into the global stage and just distort the routine. A big part of Pope Francis that I picked was on issues around environment and how, I think it was 2015 when he published some book that talked about how the world was more responsible to the things that makes them better and not make the world better. And he kept on going and challenging the status quo of what the global business leaders were doing, the global leaders in terms of political leaders were doing, that were not pro the planet. So I think coming from Pope Benedict to him, we had never seen that. And he was at the forefront of challenging capitalism and consumerism and saying, hey, why don't we look at how we are going to leave this world a better place for the children and the children who will follow these children, as opposed to looking at it from our own perspective that we want all this economic development, but forgetting that the planet is the basis of everything. So that was very, very key for me. The other thing, and that also embodied his humility, was one thing that a number of people, if you listen to them this week that worked with him closely, said he wanted priests to smell like the sheep. That you go out there and mix with the people you are spreading this gospel to and listen to them and get the context of their survival or suffering, such that when you want to address it, then you address it from the point of knowledge. He criticized what he called airport bishops, and I don't know what that is within the Catholic Church, but I think it made reference to the bishops that wanted to feel and behave superior to the congregation. And you read a lot about him, and it says that he was breaking down the traditional Catholic hierarchy, such that there was consultation right from the congregation upwards, that in case there were issues, then go to the congregation and seek for a solution from them, as opposed to giving them what would be termed a boardroom solution. So that tells you the kind of a person that Pope Francis is. For me, I think the Catholic Church has lost and the world has lost, on the score that he brought all these issues that people rarely speak about to the pulpit. LGBTQ. And saying, why is it that when a business leader comes here, we are more comfortable to bless his business that sometimes may be harming the planet? But we are shying away from blessing certain marriages on the basis that they're evil and stuff. So these are conversations that the church ideally do not want to have. But here is Francis bringing them to the fore and willing to take a step outside the normal and confront and be able to discuss them in public.
In fact, one of the things he said is, who am I to judge?
Exactly.
I remember it was earlier on, almost earlier.
Even though that has actually been a very controversial
issue,
who am I to judge, including the explanations that we hear that he was not talking about blessing the unions, but talking about blessing the individuals, because what may be considered as sin, you're dealing with a sin, but there's a sin as well. And I remember early in the week I was speaking to a priest and a Christian lawyer here in studio, and they were explaining the same concept, talking about that people pursue faith because of their challenges that they face.
Individual.
And when you sin, there's the possibility of forgiveness. So the Pope was saying that whatever it is, whatever the circumstance, you should not be locking out people because of their circumstances. You have to distinguish between the person and the sin, which I think was quite an interesting encounter to hear from the religious leader. But at the same time, Jamila, and I know, like I said, he's a religious leader, these others are political leaders. He is the head of the Vatican City, which is a city-state. We have heads of governments and states, which are political in nature. But I think there are lessons to be picked there. And I'll use this inference again back to Kangemi when he was driving in to the St. Joseph the Worker. And I would see how he was mingling with the people, how he got into the grounds of the University of Nairobi for the mass that he celebrated there, or he presided there. And you see very close, if it were a political leader, how would they be mingling with the people? How do they get into a stadium? How do they get into a ground, into a church? Ordinarily, you'll find that they have several layers of security, of course, to protect them.
Sure.
You have, if he's the president, they would have the elite squad, they would have the inner circle that really protects the president, you'd have the GSU officers, you have regular police officers, and you also have the National Youth Service guarding or keeping the queue or keeping the boundaries of how far the people should come. When he is waving, if you have gone, you must have, all of them must have attended national celebrations, he'll wave from the presidential days from a distance. Bulletproof vehicle. But for Pope Francis, that was different. Again, of course, you have to guard a head of state. You have to guard, protect political leaders. But it also tells me something. The Pope was not afraid to mingle with the people that were receiving him, call them Christians or congregants or whatever the name that you want to give. There's also an element of trust that he believes that these people will not come to hurt me. He's not even considering that. He's coming to speak to the people of God just like himself. For leaders, I think there's a lesson to be picked here. Do you need to surround yourself with so much security? Do you need to have the strongest machine or vehicle? Recently, a politician told me that kuna gari na kuna magari. Do you really need that to move around with all your windows tinted? What is it that you're shielding yourself from? Because if you are a servant of the people, you're serving the people. You are a leader for that particular reason. How do people get you in office to serve them? Then the next thing, you're protecting yourself from them. What is this tragedy that is going to befall you? What is it with the lost trust that is coming? And I know that many will say that, you know, I don't want to be disturbed. Maybe, you know, these poor people may be looking for resources, may be looking for money. They may want to come and disrupt me. Why is that happening? Why is there so much poverty in the society? In the end, the Pope highlighted the challenges that the population was facing. Our leaders are expected to resolve those challenges. That's why they are people's representatives. That's why they are voted in a universal suffrage format, so that they can go and address the challenges of the people. If we all did that, we would actually reduce the question of mistrust that continues to bedevil most of our societies, most of our processes that we have to go through, including that now you have to be overly cautious of what laws are being passed in Parliament or being considered in Parliament. We have lost the element of trust, which we need, if possible, we need to bring back.
You say something interesting, Gituko, and I read somewhere, and I'm going to read two paragraphs. Pope Francis saw the papacy not as power, but as responsibility. Here, political office is often treated as a reward, complete with sirens, endless protocol, and exaggerated sense of self-importance. He challenged corruption within the church. Here, corruption is baked into the system. Investigations vanish, files disappear, the accused get reshuffled, not removed. And while Pope Francis brought the world together through faith, compassion, and courage, Kenyan politics continues to thrive on division, on tribal loyalty, party allegiance, and the dangerous game of us versus them. So what you talk about, that there's this huge, I don't know what to call it, a body of water or a bridge or whatever it is between you and the people who you're supposed to serve. And you talk about him, mtu wa watu, you are there for the people. Because you cannot equate the kind of leaders we have with being there for the people. You talk about how there's this thing of leaders even, I think, going to power. I think the intention usually to go into power is to accumulate wealth. Unataka kuwa mbunge, unataka kuwa governor, unataka kuwa whatever it is, ili upate hizo hela, because of course it opens these doors for all these opportunities, contacts, contracts, zabuni, tunaita kwa Kiswahili. But that should not be the goal of being a leader. You should be there for those people who you will go to kuomba kura, who you will promise all these things, from roads to jobs to school fees for their children to fertilizer for their crops. But then when you get to that point, umekakwa hiyo kiti, you forget all that. So much so that you remember it a year to elections and you start making all those promises again. So I think the life of Pope Francis should be a lesson for our leaders, and should be a lesson for the electorate who elect those leaders, to look at the kind of people they want to lead them, people who lead them for them, for the people, but not for them, the leaders, selfishly.
But unfortunately, our leaders know this all too well.
Yeah.
Because if you listen to them speak in Parliament only the other day and celebrating the Pope for who he was, he embodied humility, he was a servant leader, he mingled with the people without caring where they came from, their race and all that. But the very, very people leave that same Parliament 5 or so minutes after that speech with their windows rolled up, cars being led by sirens and all that. So they know what to do, but they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And that is the tragedy of leadership in most parts of the world, that leadership is not seen as a service to the people, but as being the people being your subjects. You lord over them, that the people that put you in position of responsibility in turn becomes your subject, and you dictate, or rather want to dictate, how they should one view you and to treat you. I think if there's anything that the leadership globally, and I know a number of them will be trooping to the Vatican over the weekend for the burial, let them have a point of reflection and come back and practice what Pope Francis preached.
Yeah.
That would be a legacy and an honor to him. Otherwise, it would all be in vain.
True. And Gituko, before you come in one second, I think I wanted you to speak about this. When he was here in 2015, the Pope spoke about corruption. He spoke about fighting tribalism, and he had a message to the youth, telling them that they have a path, they have to choose a path, that their voice needs to be heard. Right. He talked about how they'll be difficult, there'll be division, but they need to look for the opportunities. But those are some of the things that we're still seeing in the country 10 years later. The same issues, tribalism, corruption, and what the youth are getting for.
And you recall even the president that time, President Uhuru Kenyatta, asking the Holy Father for prayers.
Yeah. Yep.
And saying that there's a big challenge that he's facing as the leader of the country because of the corruption issues. And of course, you can look at also the challenges that we're witnessing at the time. So the Pope promised to pray, and I would imagine he prayed.
Yeah.
But every other leader who has come, whether they are members of parliament, whether they are governors or they are presidents, they always say that pray for me because I have a difficult task. Where does it end? Is it just about asking for prayer, or do you actually also introspect and look for solutions on what exactly you can do? To take you back to the question of the humility of the Pope. So he's elected and he chooses to stay away from the palace and instead to go to an apartment where the cardinals attending the conclave are supposed to be spending time at, and that's where he has lived for the last 12 years. When we elect a leader, whether a governor or president who actually have official residence, have they ever chosen to stay away from the palace and live somewhere else, or away from the official residence and somewhere else? In fact, recently we have heard of a situation of renovating some of the official residences across the country, which is also a moment of reflection, because at the same time as this is happening, it's not like there was no offices for these governors and, of course, the president. But then the question of priorities, with so many challenges affecting the country, how do we prioritize how we spend money? And if you have to look at even the reports of the control of budget, it will tell you that actually we are not necessarily prioritizing the resources that we have on the most pressing issues that affect the people. If you have to look at the Article 223 that allows for emergency spending, it has been used and abused, as attested by the control of budget and different reports from the Auditor General and Parliament itself, but it still continued to do it. Yeah. I think if you're to give any tribute to Pope Francis and remember that he ever visited Kenya, one of the things that we must do is to change the culture of our leadership and the desire for more resources, the desire for a better environment for the leader, forgetting the people that they lead.
I think Pope Francis showed the world that true leadership lives in humility, in honesty and service. That to lead is to kneel, not to be carried.
Exactly.
To listen, not just to speak, and to serve, not just to rule. I think his legacy is worth remembering. And I think perhaps for us, it's a standard worth aspiring to. And leaders should aspire to be like Pope Francis. You're watching The News Gang. We are taking a short break. We'll be back with more shortly.